the rumble of a mid-century Harley-Davidson, or the sharper growl of a British Triumph, rolling through the quiet suburbs of Prince George's County, Maryland, in 1959, wasn't just background noise. It marked the beginning of something far bigger. What started as a small riding group would, over time, grow into one of the most structured and feared outlaw motorcycle organizations in the Western world. The Pagans Motorcycle Club, known simply as the Pagans or the Pagan Nation, didn't follow the familiar West Coast path. While clubs like the Hells Angels were taking shape in California, the Pagans built their identity on the East Coast, rooted in working-class streets and a tougher, more grounded culture. This is the story of how 13 riders turned into a tightly organized force, known today for its strict hierarchy, violent reputation, and relentless fight for control across the East Coast. The Denim beginning, Lou Dobkin and the Maryland roots. The origins of the Pagans Motorcycle Club are closely tied to one man, Lou Dobkin. In 1957, he started bringing together a handful of riders in Prince George's County, Maryland. By 1959, that small circle became official. 13 founding members, bonded by motorcycles and a shared mindset. Back then, there was nothing especially dangerous about them. No headlines, no fear. Just riders on Harley-Davidsons and Triumphs, wearing blue denim jackets instead of the black leather that would later define outlaw biker culture. That denim wasn't a fashion statement. It reflected who they were. Working-class men, practical and straightforward. In post-war America, denim had already become a symbol of rebellion and freedom, thanks to icons like James Dean. The Pagans made it their own. They cut the sleeves off their jackets, creating what bikers now call a cut. Not just for comfort while riding, but to proudly display their club patch. That original blue denim cut is still mandatory today, setting them apart from leather-wearing rivals and tying every member back to those Maryland beginnings. The shift from a simple riding club to something more serious didn't happen overnight, but one moment pushed things forward. In the mid-1960s, during a motorcycle race in Maryland, the group's behavior caught attention. Local newspapers labeled them as part of the 1% of motorcyclists who caused problems. The phrase came from a wider claim that 99% of riders were law-abiding citizens. Instead of rejecting the label, the Pagans leaned into it. They adopted the 1%er patch, a diamond-shaped symbol that openly declared their outlaw identity. What started as criticism became a badge of pride. That single move didn't just define the Pagans, it helped shape outlaw biker culture as a whole, a symbol later worn by clubs like the Hells Angels, Outlaws, and Banditos. And from that point on, the tone had changed. Anatomy of the Pagan Nation: power, structure, and control. The Pagan Nation isn't a loose pack of riders doing their own thing. From early on, it developed into something far more controlled, closer to a military chain of command or a corporate boardroom than a casual motorcycle club. At the top sits a governing body known as the Mother Club. This inner circle, traditionally made up of 13 senior members, sets the direction for the entire organization. They decide policy, handle discipline, and approve the expansion of new chapters across different regions. The nomadic leadership. One thing that sets the Pagans apart is how their leadership operates. Unlike other outlaw clubs that run everything from a fixed home base, the Pagans keep their mother club moving. It doesn't belong to one city. It shifts, mostly staying somewhere in the Northeast, but never locking into a permanent location. That movement isn't random, it's strategic. A shifting headquarters makes it harder for law enforcement to track their top leadership or build long-term cases against them. At the same time, it stops any single chapter from becoming too powerful. Control stays at the top, spread across regions instead of being tied to one place. Inside the Mother Club, roles are clearly defined. The national president, often called the Diamond, sits at the very top. This position carries full authority over the entire organization. Back in the 1960s, the club even built a rule into its structure. The national president would be paid the same salary as the President of the United States, $100,000 a year at the time. It was their way of showing how seriously they viewed leadership and status. Right below him is the national vice president, who helps manage operations across regions and ensures orders are carried out. The national sergeant at arms handles enforcement. This role is about security, discipline, and, when necessary, directing violence against rivals. Then there's the national secretary and treasurer, responsible for managing money, tracking dues, and keeping the organization financially stable. The Maid Port chapter discipline and church. Below the national level are local chapters, each with its own leadership. President, vice president, and sergeant at arms. But no matter where a chapter operates, the rules stay tight. Discipline inside the Pagans is strict. Members are expected to attend weekly meetings known as church. And showing up sober isn't optional, it's required. Miss 3 meetings in a row without a solid reason, and you're out. No second chances. Money is another part of that structure. Every member pays around $100 a month in dues. That money moves up the chain to the mother club, creating a steady flow of cash. It covers legal defense, supports families of members who end up in prison, and helps fund operations approved by the club. The meaning behind the patch, Searcher and its origins. The Pagans' identity isn't just in how they operate, it's also in what they wear. Their colors, stitched onto those signature blue denim cuts, carry a deeper meaning. At the center is an image of Searcher, the fire giant from Norse mythology, sitting on the sun with a flaming sword in hand. It's a symbol tied to destruction and rebirth, reflecting the club's mindset and how it sees its place in the world. What makes it even more interesting is where that image came from. It wasn't created inside the club. It was taken from a comic book illustration by Jack Kirby, featured in Journey into Mystery number 97, published by Marvel Comics. A piece of pop culture became one of the most recognizable symbols in outlaw biker history, reshaped to represent power, rebellion, and a willingness to burn everything down if necessary. Territorial rockers and identity patches. One of the most telling details in the Pagans' identity sits right on the back of their cut, the bottom rocker. Most outlaw clubs use that space to show a specific city or state. The Pagans do something different. Their rocker simply reads East Coast. It's not just a label, it's a statement. They're not tied to one place. In their eyes, the entire Atlantic coastline falls under their reach. Alongside the main patch and rocker, members wear a series of numbers and coded patches. Each one carries meaning, rank, history, or belief. And within the club, those details matter. The number 13 shows up often. It can point to the 13th letter of the alphabet, M, which can stand for Mother Club, Marijuana, or Mayhem. It can also reference the original 13 founders or the 13 members who make up the governing board. Then there's 16, which represents the letter P for Pagans. Some patches are more direct. PGFG stands for Pagans Go, Fuck God, reflecting a clear rejection of religion and traditional authority. LPDP, Live Pagan, Die Pagan, is a promise of lifelong loyalty. And then there's 666, a symbol widely recognized as the Mark of the Beast, used here to show a complete break from mainstream moral codes. None of these patches are handed out easily. To wear full colors, a prospect has to earn it. That means going through a probation period, proving loyalty, enduring hazing, and taking part in whatever the club demands, including criminal activity. By the time someone is fully patched in, they've already shown they're willing to take risks and stand with the club no matter what. The Dark Shift, John Satan Maron and the criminal Lou Dobkin may have started the Pagans, but it was John Satan Maron who changed what they would become. His influence began in the late 1960s and carried into the 1970s, a time when the club grew fast and became far more aggressive. The Sons of Satan merger. One of the turning points came with the Sons of Satan Motorcycle Club out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. At first, they weren't known for anything extreme. They were described as a fairly friendly, almost family-style group, until Maron took control. Tensions between the Pagans and the Sons of Satan built up during the 1960s, but instead of a prolonged conflict, things shifted after a meeting between Maron and the Pagans' president, Fred Dutch Boerhaans. That meeting changed everything. The two formed a strong alliance. Not long after, groups merged. Maron and a select number of his men officially became Pagans, while the rest of the Sons of Satan were kept under their influence as a brother club, effectively operating under pagan control. When Maron eventually rose to national president, the club expanded quickly. By the early 1970s, membership had climbed to around 5,000, but that growth came with a darker edge. Maron ran things with a ruthless mindset. He was later convicted of ordering a hit on a rival leader and ended up in prison in the mid-1970s, facing charges tied to homicide and violent assaults. Under his leadership, the focus of the club shifted, moving deeper into narcotics trafficking, extortion, and using violence to eliminate competition. That period didn't just grow the Pagans, it reshaped them, setting the tone for what the Pagan Nation would become. The Shadow War, clash with the Hells Angels. You can't talk about the Pagans without talking about their longest and most violent rivalry, with the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. This isn't just about bad blood between two groups. It's a calculated fight over territory, influence, and control of criminal markets along the East Coast. For the Pagans, any move by the Hells Angels into the Mid-Atlantic or Northeast isn't competition. It's a direct challenge to their authority. The Hellraiser's Ball, 2002. One of the most explosive moments in this feud came on February 23, 2002, at the Vanderbilt Banquet Hall on Long Island. That night, the Hells Angels were hosting an event called the Hellraiser's Ball. It was open to the public, tattoo contests, live blues bands, a typical biker gathering on the surface. Then, everything changed. In a planned move, somewhere between 60 and 73 pagans from the different states stormed into the hall. They didn't come empty-handed. Axe handles, baseball bats, knives. What followed was fast, chaotic, and brutal. By the time it was over, one pagan, Robert Rutherford, was dead. Dozens of people on both sides were injured. Police moved in and arrested 73 pagans at the scene, recovering close to 500 weapons. The aftermath hit hard. Law enforcement cracked down heavily on the Pagans' Long Island chapter, but at the same time, the message was clear. The club was willing to organize and carry out large-scale, almost military-style attacks when it came to their rivals. The woodshed and the Schuylkill execution. The conflict didn't slow down. In January 2005, it flared up again, this time at a bar known as the Woodshed in Burlington County, New Jersey. A group of pagans targeted 3 Hells Angels members who were trying to recruit in the area. The attack was direct and violent. The 3 were beaten badly. What made things even more tense was something the pagans don't forgive: members switching sides. Some former pagans had patched over and joined the Hells Angels. Inside this world, that's seen as betrayal. Weeks after the Woodshed incident, one of those former members was killed in a drive-by shooting on the Schuylkill Expressway in Philadelphia. According to law enforcement, this chain of violence had a real impact. It slowed down and, for a time, almost completely stopped the Hells Angels from expanding into the Philadelphia and South Jersey region. The criminal economy, meth, pills, and organized ties. Behind the violence, there's another layer: money. The pagans built a wide criminal network, using their position along the East Coast to control and move illegal operations. Years, the club was closely tied to methamphetamine, known in biker circles as crank, from chemists to distributors. Back in the 1970s and 80s, the pagans were deeply involved in producing meth themselves. They ran hidden labs in rural parts of Pennsylvania and West Virginia, keeping operations out of sight. Things changed when laws around chemical ingredients became stricter. Instead of making the product, the club adapted. They shifted into distribution, moving larger quantities rather than producing them. Reports suggest they built connections with Mexican drug cartels, helping bring high-purity meth into the Northeast. It marked a clear shift in strategy. Instead of staying local, they plugged into a much bigger international network. That move showed something important. Pagans weren't stuck in one way of doing things. They adjusted, expanded, and stayed relevant in a changing criminal landscape. The modern pill mill connection. As the drug landscape changed, the pagans adapted again. This time, it wasn't just about street drugs, it was about prescription pills. In Philadelphia, the club was tied to a so-called pill mill operation. According to investigators, a local doctor worked alongside members of the club, pushing out large volumes of prescription narcotics. For the pagans, this kind of setup had clear advantages. It brought in serious money without the same level of risk that comes with street-level dealing. No corners, no hand-to-hand sales, just a steady flow of pills moving through a system that looked legitimate on the surface. Ties with traditional organized crime. The pagans didn't operate in isolation. Over the years, they built complicated relationships with traditional organized crime groups, especially the Italian Mafia in Philadelphia. Back in the 1980s, when Nicodemo Scarfo, known as Little Nicky, was running things, tensions were high. Pagans refused to pay a street tax to the mob, and that decision led to multiple violent clashes. But rivalry wasn't the whole story. By the late 1990s, both sides found a reason to work together. A rising group called the 10th and Oregon Crew started pushing into territories tied to drug dealing and loan sharking in South Philadelphia. That pressure forced an unlikely alliance. The pagans and the Philly mob joined forces to push back. Moments like that show how the pagans operate. They can fight against organized crime or work alongside it, depending on what benefits them most. Acting as muscle for established crime families only strengthened their position in the underworld. The transformation into slam. Working under the name Slam, Croak spent 2 years inside the Pagan Nation from 2009 to 2011. To survive, he couldn't just observe. He had to become part of it. He took on the role of an enforcer, someone expected to back up the leadership and use violence if needed. It meant living a double life under constant pressure, where one mistake could expose everything. During that time, he saw the inner side of the club: violence, extremist behavior, drug use, and rituals that rarely come to light. It wasn't the image often shown in movies or media. It was darker, harsher, and far more controlled. One of the biggest challenges was the drug culture inside the club. To avoid suspicion, Croak had to fake taking substances like methamphetamine and cocaine during gatherings. He relied on small tricks just to stay in character. What he later revealed gave investigators a rare look inside. His account described a world driven less by brotherhood and more by control, crime, and deeply rooted prejudice. That operation eventually led to a major RICO case, taking down a large portion of the club's leadership at the time. Modern resurgence and the paradigm shift. Even after years of federal crackdowns and major cases, the Pagans haven't faded. In fact, they've been growing again. A 2020 report from the New Jersey State Commission of Investigation pointed out a sharp rise in both membership and activity, especially in New Jersey, where the number of chapters has doubled. Relaxed recruitment and strategic expansion. That growth didn't happen by accident. The club made a deliberate change, a paradigm shift in how they recruit. For a long time, the Pagans were known for being exclusively white, with a long and demanding process to become a full member. That's changed. To build numbers quickly, especially with ongoing pressure from rivals like the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. They've loosened those rules. Now, they're recruiting from groups that were once completely off limits, including ethnic minorities and even street gangs. It's a practical move, aimed at strengthening their presence and pushing into new areas. That strategy has already had an impact. The Pagans have expanded further north, moving into places traditionally dominated by the Hells Angels, areas like Bergen County, New Jersey, and parts of New York City. But with that expansion has come more visibility and more violence. Law enforcement has reported more pagan-related incidents in just 18 months. Conclusion: the sovereign nation of the highway. The Pagans Motorcycle Club is no longer just a small group of riders from Maryland, wearing denim and riding Triumphs. Over the years, it has turned into something far more complex. An organization that adapts, rebuilds, and continues to operate despite constant pressure. From the influence of figures like Satan Maron to more recent leadership under Keith Richter, the focus has stayed the same: control territory, maintain power, and protect the identity of the one percenter. Law enforcement continues to target the Pagan Nation, but the club's ability to recover, even after major RICO cases, shows how deeply rooted it has become. And as it expands further north and brings in new members from different backgrounds, its presence only grows. On the highways of the East Coast, the image of Surtur still stands, watching over a brotherhood that follows its own rules, where loyalty is everything, and where power is measured in one currency above all else: